The wind cut through Daniel's thin jacket like icy knives as he crouched beside the rusty truck, hands fumbling with the stubborn battery wire. Inside the cab, his 8-year-old son, Luke, clutched a worn comic book, pretending to be lost in the pages, but quietly watching his dad's trembling fingers. Winter had been merciless this year, and work had been nearly impossible to find. Daniel had been laid off from the factory 6 months ago, and every odd job he managed barely covered the groceries. Rent was overdue. The electric bill carried a bright red warning. Still, he pressed on, driven by a stubborn kind of hope, because Luke was counting on him. Daniel wasn't the type to give up. He wore the burden of responsibility like armor, though inside he felt worn and weary. That morning, he had scanned the community board at the tiny town diner, eyes flicking over faded flyers and scribbled notes, when one caught his attention. Help needed. Shed roof repair. Call Margaret. Fair pay. It wasn't glamorous, but Daniel knew roofing and carpentry. Heart pounding with a mix of relief and caution, he grabbed the number and dialed. A calm, steady voice answered. "If you can come by today, I'd appreciate it." By afternoon, Daniel and Luke were bouncing along a dusty dirt road in the old truck, following Margaret's directions. They had expected a modest farm, maybe a few chickens pecking around, a field of corn swaying in the breeze. But what awaited them was even simpler, yet somehow heavier with life. A sagging wooden shed leaned awkwardly on a small patch of land, with a farmhouse that looked as tired as the soil it rested on. An older woman, boots caked in dirt and a wide-brimmed hat shading silver hair, waved them over. Her posture was firm, confident, despite the lines of age on her face. "You must be Daniel," she said warmly. "And this young man." Luke peeked out from behind the cab door and offered a shy smile. "I'm Luke." Margaret's eyes softened. Well, here it begins, she thought, a faint spark of hope in her gaze. "Luke, feel free to explore while your dad helps me," Margaret said, nodding toward a sturdy oak tree. "There's a swing, if you like." Daniel felt a surge of relief wash over him. Most people didn't have patience for a kid tagging along on a job. But Margaret, she treated Luke like he belonged, like he mattered. The shed was worse than Daniel had imagined. Holes in the roof let rain trickle in, beams sagged under years of neglect, and the whole structure seemed ready to collapse with the slightest wind. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, prying out rotten boards and replacing them with solid planks he'd hauled from his truck. Margaret climbed the ladder beside him with a surprising steadiness. Not many women can swing a hammer like that. Daniel teased, trying to lighten the hard work. Margaret laughed, a sound rough but warm. You'd be surprised what a woman can handle when life doesn't give her much choice. Her words lingered in his mind. He looked at her face. Every line told a story, not just of age, but of years carrying weight, shoulder after shoulder of responsibility. They worked until the sun sank low, turning the sky into a canvas of orange and pink. Daniel's muscles ached, his hands were raw, but a quiet satisfaction filled him. The shed looked solid again, like it might stand for decades. Margaret pressed a folded wad of cash into his hands. "You earned every bit of it." Daniel hesitated. "This is too much." She cut him off with a gentle, knowing look. "It's fair." In the weeks that followed, Margaret kept calling. Fences to mend, porch steps to repair, fallen branches to clear. Each time, Luke came along, and each time Margaret welcomed him with the same warm patience. She made them sandwiches, told stories about the land, and listened when Luke chatted about school, his voice brimming with excitement. Slowly, a bond grew. Margaret asked the questions no one else bothered to ask. "Are you holding up, Daniel? Do you have enough groceries?" Daniel felt something he hadn't in months, a fragile thread of hope, a quiet trust that maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely alone. "How's Luke holding up with all this?" Margaret asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. He never revealed the full truth, how tight money had become, how long the eviction notice had been burning a hole in his pocket, but somehow Margaret seemed to see right through him. Then came the night that felt heavier than any winter wind. Daniel sat alone at the tiny kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice. 10 days. 10 days to scrape together the rent or leave. His chest tightened, heart hammering, as Luke slept unaware on the couch, dreaming of cartoons and superheroes. Daniel buried his face in his hands and whispered to the empty room, "God, I'm trying. I don't know what else to do." The next day, he trudged to Margaret's farm, eyes red and shoulders sagging under invisible weight. She noticed immediately, but didn't pry. Instead, she asked gently, "Daniel, would you help me move some equipment tomorrow? Might take a couple of days. Any work was better than none." He nodded, trying to summon energy from somewhere deep. But when he arrived the next morning, the world he expected was gone. Margaret didn't lead him to the small shed or the yard. She walked him past endless rolling fields, past hills that seemed to stretch forever. Gleaming tractors dotted the landscape, barns lined the horizon, and workers waved cheerfully in the distance. Daniel stopped dead, mouth slightly open. All this is yours." Margaret's smile was gentle, almost secretive. "Yes, I suppose I should have mentioned it sooner." He shook his head, incredulous. "But you live so simply. I thought it was just that little shed, the farmhouse." Margaret nodded. "I do live simply. I don't need much. But yes, I own this land. Thousands of acres, passed down through my family. I manage it with the help of many." Daniel's mind raced. Weeks of sweat, aching muscles, and honest labor, and he had never guessed. She was wealthy beyond anything he could have imagined. Speechless, he simply stared, trying to reconcile the kindness he had experienced with the secret fortune it had come from. Margaret's eyes softened, warm and steady. "I didn't hide it from you to trick you," she said. "I just wanted to see who you were, when you thought I had nothing to give but friendship." In the weeks that followed, their bond grew stronger. Margaret watched Daniel closely, his tireless work ethic, his quiet kindness, the way he loved his son with every ounce of himself. And Daniel began to see her differently too, not just as a wealthy landowner, but as a woman of wisdom, compassion, and integrity. She started offering him steady work, managing repairs, overseeing parts of the farm, even training him to take on more responsibility. Slowly, carefully, Daniel's life began to stabilize. Debts were paid off, rent was caught up, Luke got new clothes. For the first time in months, Daniel could breathe without the constant, suffocating fear of losing everything. Yet the greatest gift wasn't the money, it was the trust, the dignity, and the chance Margaret had given him one evening. As the sun dipped behind the rolling hills of golden fields, painting the sky in gold and pink, Margaret sat with Daniel and Luke on the farmhouse porch. "Daniel," she said softly, her gaze steady, "I don't think it's an accident. You came here. You've faced hardship, yes, but you've also carried strength, and now you can build something lasting for you and your boy. Daniel's throat tightened, his eyes shimmering. I don't know how to thank you. Margaret smiled, gentle and knowing. Just promise me this. When someone stumbles into your life, struggling like you once did, you'll do for them what I've done for you. From that day forward, Daniel worked with purpose, not just for survival, but to create a future. Luke flourished, proud of his father, filled with excitement for what lay ahead. The man who once felt broken now stood tall, proof that kindness, trust, and hard work could transform a life. And Margaret, she didn't see Daniel as just a worker. She saw him as family,